So, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Neurocalm Fatigue Summit. I'm delighted to have with me today Fiona Agombar, who is a rest activist, among other things. She's a yoga therapist, author, and as I said, she describes herself as a rest activist. She specialises in teaching online yoga for all fatigue conditions, and this includes ME, CFS, exhaustion, burnout from stress, and long COVID. And she uses a combination of mantra, breath work, and very gentle movements to create space to ground and soothe the nervous system so that energy can flow more effectively. She's just written a new book, Yoga Therapy for Stress, Burnout, and Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. And she is very well versed in the world of chronic fatigue generally, including ME, CFS. So welcome, Fiona. It's fantastic to have you here.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, it's brilliant to have you. So, Fiona, what is a rest activist?
Well, it's a conundrum, isn't it? Because it's a rest and an activist that kind of mean the opposite things. But what I mean is that I'm promoting rest because I think we have a society which is almost burnt out. Everybody's rushing too fast. Everybody's busy, busy, busy. Nobody has any time. And we're encouraged to be doing all the time. We're not encouraged to rest. So I call myself a rest activist because I like to promote this idea that resting is okay. It's cool. It's not lazy. It's actually very healing for our central nervous system. And we should all be doing a lot more of it at all levels. Even if we haven't got any, everybody should be resting more.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. So, has this rest got a particular quality to it? I mean, it's not just lying around mouldering, is it? It's a healing kind of rest.
That reminds me of an interesting anecdote because a few years ago at one of the London teaching hospitals, they were advocating that people with ME should rest for 40 minutes 3 times a day. And that meant no podcasts, no phone, no reading, no music. And people were actually getting better from this. And then I had an ME group on a retreat and I explained this to them. And I always remember some of them looked very panic stricken. I've actually written about this in my book, and they were saying, well, can't I just have some music, or can't I have a guided meditation? So the idea for many people of actually being for 40 minutes in complete silence and maybe dark is very confronting, but actually it's what we need to do if we need to reset our nervous system. We need everything to recalibrate and give it that chance just to come down. And also, it helps to take us out of the stress response, the sympathetic nervous system, back into the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah. So you're moving there to a complete freedom from stimulation, aren't you? Rather than just lying around doing nothing in your usual environment.
Exactly, yes. So we are talking about deep healing rest that can actually heal. And I mean, there are certain techniques in yoga, such as yoga nidra. Yoga nidra means yoga sleep. And it is a way of actually talking somebody almost like hypnosis into a very deep state of rest. So, I mean, in that example, yes, there is somebody guiding you, but there are methods where we can get people very deep into rest. And when we rest, that's where the healing occurs.
And what I'm noticing about yoga nidra is you do go into the body very much, don't you, in that resting strategy?
Yes.
So when you're working with yoga for ME/CFS, Fiona, how do you pitch it? Because obviously there's lots of people who can't cope with yoga at all. In the kind of everyday understanding of yoga, it's quite hardcore. I've always been surprised what hard work yoga can actually be. So I'm imagining that you've modulated your training and your teaching very much to be sensitive to this community of people.
Yes. So I don't teach traditional yoga, although I trained to teach like that. I don't teach yoga as people might imagine it, with lots of postures or asana or physical work. I'm focusing much more on breathing, healthy breathing from the diaphragm through the nose, because that's key to encouraging energy to flow more effectively around the body. I use mantra. People don't have to use it if they don't like, but a lot of my students find that really helpful, because we now know that sound can help the vagus nerve to reset. That's part of the parasympathetic nervous system. I do use a lot of rest. So we have a pose called Shavasana, so we use a lot of constructive rest. And then I use some movement, but it's very, very gentle, usually floor-based. And always, I offer people choice. Because what I found in my teaching is a lot of people who have fatigue conditions can quite often have had trauma. And therefore, if you're teaching yoga for people with these conditions, you need a trauma-informed approach. So that is, again, another way of teaching where you're offering people choice all the time, so that if somebody thinks something isn't appropriate or it's too strong, they know it's okay to rest out. And then above all, I'm guiding people to listen to their inner voice, to try to give them back agency. So even though I'm guiding them, I don't feel I'm an instructor or a teacher. I feel I'm just guiding them back to their kind of own truth, their inner voice, their inner wisdom, so that they're not so triggered by all these external voices we're hearing all the time, you know, from the government, the media, education, television. They start to listen to who they really are. But we can only do this when we're quiet.
Yeah. And when you say trauma informed, have you got particular strategies other than giving, you know, permission to say, you know, obviously this doesn't feel good for me, so I'm going to stop. But are there particular strategies that people can use to be sensitive to their own trauma when they're tuning into themselves to rest?
There are strategies that I've used in my teacher training, and it's in chapter 2 of my book. But I mean, I think if somebody has trauma, I would advise them to seek out a yoga therapist who understands trauma, or a therapist who understands trauma. When we're working with trauma, we're working very much somatically. So we're trying to get people to reconnect with their bodies. Because very often they're really disconnected, you know, and they're miles away in their head. Or either that, or they're overactivated, or they're shut down. So the idea of trauma-informed yoga is to bring back the vagus nerve back online, to bring people back safely into their bodies. Some people might feel very overwhelmed when they come to make that connection with their bodies, so we have to be very careful. But I would say that overall, trauma-informed yoga is about helping the client to feel safe, and also to encourage social connection, so that there's not such a feeling of isolation.
Yeah,
overactivation.
Connection's huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
For people with ME/CFS, social connection's a huge thing.
Yeah.
So challenging to achieve.
It's very challenging because people very often need a lot of time on their own to rest. Or they might need to live on their own. I mean, a lot of the people I work with have pets. And that can be really beneficial, you know, having a cat or a dog, because it actually does give that social connection that we all need. You know, if you can't get out of the house, it's really important. But I think, you know, for my clients, even coming to a yoga class once or twice a week, even if it's on Zoom, can also help with that social connection.
It's beautiful work that you're doing. What are your thoughts on like the wider, deeper meaning of fatigue, Fiona, as an invitation to us all to wake up?
I think that's a really good point. And I think it's particularly interesting over the last couple of years how the pandemic has sadly created a lot of burnout and long COVID. But, you know, I think there is a message there. And the message is that everybody is rushing and too busy, working too much. Sometimes in my yoga group, people talk about this as internalized capitalism, or they talk about the patriarchy. When I say the patriarchy, I don't in any way mean this as anti-male, because I think men are victims as much as women. But it is this kind of cultural message we have, that unless we're achieving and driving and producing and pushing, we are not worthy. And then when we get ill or sick, we feel this great sense of shame on top of being ill, because we can't engage in society in the way that it is. When we were talking before you started to record, I was mentioning that writers like Dr. Gabor Mate talk about, he's just got a new book out called The Myth of Normal, because he's saying our normal is actually insane. We should not be living at this pace. So to me, I think fatigue is a message to listen to the body, to slow down, to pace, that it's okay to rest. It's cool to rest. Do not be ashamed of resting. And, you know, I'm always trying to educate people, not just people with ME, but people who just are stressed or burnt out, that it's okay to rest. And that this idea of listening to the body is so important, and not listening so much to the cues our society is giving us, because maybe we actually need to be questioning how we're living at the moment.
And do you find that some people find that a really hard lesson to actually embrace? The ability to slow down comes hard.
Well, I find it difficult myself. And I've had bouts of chronic fatigue for probably about 30 years. I've had like a 7-year period when I was well, and then I had a tick bite, so I got ill again. But I managed myself very, very well. But I manage a good, happy lifestyle by not overdoing things. And recently, I'm in the process of moving. I live in Spain, but I'm moving to another house. And I was, just to share, that I was packing up, and I was packing for about 8 hours. And at the time, I was saying, "Stop, Fiona! You're going to have a relapse if you do this." But I was finding it a real struggle. And in fact, I was okay. I did have to rest for a couple of days. But what I'm saying is, our conditioning, which goes all the way back to childhood, is very difficult to unwind. It helps that we can observe it. Like, I could observe myself like this, and I knew it wasn't good. So, the observation and awareness is the first thing. But I think most people that I work with ME would admit that they find it really difficult to pace, and we are type A personalities, we're achievers, we're quite driven. And so, it's a lifetime of work trying to look at that conditioning, what's the root of that conditioning, and can I unpick it? And again, that comes very much into yoga philosophy, because yoga philosophy is about also looking at your shadow side and becoming more aware of your unconscious patterns, because unless we're aware of our unconscious patterns, they're always going to be driving us. And unless we do pace and rest, we can't ever get well.
And what are some yoga strategies for feeling carefully and gently into the unconscious patterns?
Well, again, I've got some exercises for this in my book. I'm not trying to promote my book, it's just it comes to mind. But it's something, again, it's probably better to do this with a qualified yoga therapist so that you are held in a safe space. But when you come into relaxation or rest, quite often stuff will start to come up to the surface. And those might be uncomfortable feelings. There might be past memories. And then what we are trying to do, providing somebody's not overwhelmed, is to hold them in a safe space so that they can somatically process the feelings. So what I mean by that is, if you have an uncomfortable feeling or emotion, you're not thinking about it, you're not analysing it, but you're feeling, what is this experience in my body? Is it uncomfortable maybe in my tummy? Is it uncomfortable in my heart? Is my jaw tight? So you're actually experiencing what the emotion does to you. We're then bringing compassion and acceptance to that. And the more we can accept and be compassionate about those somatic feelings, the more it starts to release. Because, of course, so much is held unconsciously in the body, which then is causing the fatigue. So this is why in yoga we talk about prana flowing, because as we're releasing these blocks, then the energy or the prana can begin to flow more effectively.
That's fantastic. I mean, it ties very strongly, doesn't it, with the neuroscience that tells us that a state passes through our neurology in about 90 seconds. So if we can allow that, if we can simply let go and allow that and be comfortable with our discomfort for that 90 seconds, provided we haven't got a loop or a story or an unconscious thing holding onto it, it will just move through. It's very beautiful. And I love the addition there of the self-compassion, which is a real quality of self-relating that seems to be really, really important in healing from chronic fatigue conditions.
I find that, again, most of the people I work with don't have self-compassion. So it's quite a tricky one. But in my yoga classes, it's something we try to build on because it's so vital. Again, people will not get well unless they start to accept themselves and be compassionate to themselves. Again, this is part of society's conditioning. But just coming back to what you were saying about neuroscience and the loop, I think that, again, this is if we recognize that loop, this is when we can drop into the body and try to practice working more somatically, because then that is how we can release what can be stuck for years. Because the other thing is, if we've got uncomfortable feelings or emotions, it's very common in our society that we disassociate, or we what's the word I want? We do something else. We go and put on Netflix, or we go and have a drink, or we're not allowing ourselves to stay with what's uncomfortable. We're trying to push it away all the time by distraction is the word. We're trying to distract ourselves. So yoga is very much about coming into the present moment, staying with the body, accepting whatever the current experience is, without going into distraction or disassociation as much as we can, again providing the client's not overwhelmed by it. So we have to watch for that too.
Yes, absolutely. And when we think about, you were mentioning earlier, I think you mentioned, did you say something about shame earlier in relation to not feeling useful because of the internalization of kind of the capitalist work drive?
I think you and I were talking about that before the recording started. Yeah. And I was saying that for people with ME, there is this sense of shame because it's probably one of the last minorities which is not accepted. You know, we have been gaslighted for decades. And because in our society, it's not cool to rest, and resting is associated with being lazy. Our society, achievement is associated with doing and producing. So there is this sense of shame and, oh, I need to prove myself. I need to prove that I'm not lazy. I need to prove that I'm not skiving. So, and then people, of course, push to try to prove that they're not, that they are worthy of being in society, and then they relapse. So one way of working with this sense of shame is bringing this sense of acceptance and compassion. You know, these two qualities are really vital, I feel.
And it takes strength of character, doesn't it, in a way, because you might get to a position where you don't feel ashamed of your rest, but there's still a lot of external pressure coming on you, even family members. I mean, it's a very common report from people suffering ME/CFS and other complex fatigue conditions that even those most intimately associated with them just cannot understand what's going on, particularly because the symptoms can be so varied, it can move around so much, it looks so complex. There's a real issue there. And also, I guess some of the structural issues, I mean, if we think of stressors on us, microaggressions from racism, sexism, and other things weigh on some bodies more heavily than it weighs on other bodies. So there is a larger picture here, isn't there, Fiona, that fatigue is speaking into and speaking back to. And perhaps those of us with fatigue are learning some very, very deep lessons that are applicable much, much more broadly and actually are quite revolutionary in their potential implications. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I agree. And I like the way that you say it's quite revolutionary because of the pandemic in the last 2 years. We are seeing more and more people with burnout. And maybe we have something to teach people, that it is okay to rest and that we shouldn't be pushing and driving, and we should maybe change our priorities because otherwise the whole of our society is kind of breaking down. People are getting sick. We have massive rates of suicides, depressions, people addicted to opioids. You know, things are not really very healthy. And this is going back to Dr. Gabor Mate saying that the myth of normal, what we think of normal isn't normal. So I think for those of us with chronic fatigue, we need to learn to have boundaries so that we can say no and not feel obliged, because quite often people with ME will be very extra sensitive, or they'll be people pleasers. You know, and this all kind of feeds into this difficulty in pacing and resting and therefore recovering. So, you know, these are all issues that I think we have to address for ourselves. And then maybe we can be educating the wider population that how we are living maybe needs a reset and a rethink. And I don't use that reset in the, you know, kind of political sense. I'm just saying that we need to slow down, start growing our vegetables, smelling the flowers, and you know, waking up to how we are, instead of being in a rush until we, you know, rushed from one thing to the next until we die. That's just ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there is a real need to reconnect with the body and the way it relates to the rest of the natural world around it, to its to the environment, to the rhythms of natural life, sunlight, sleep, rising, activity, rest, a kind of seasonality, if you like, you know, that the body itself goes through its summers, its springs, its winters, its autumns. learning to respect all those rhythms and coming into attunement with the body's intelligence is very much what I'm getting from what you're saying. And
yeah, if I, sorry,
go.
I was just going to say that the sister science of yoga is Ayurveda. And Ayurveda says that we are not separate from our environment, from the seasons, from our diet, from our peer group, from our families, from where we live. You know, we're all part of all of this.
Exactly.
And we're not, you know, often we feel that we are separate, but we're not. And I think when we start to come into the body, just like you say, we start to wake up to all of this. And we can maybe start to tune in more to our circadian rhythm and realize that in the morning we need to see the sunlight, and that at night we need to be turning our lights down so that we're not staring at screens till 11 o'clock, and then that impacts on our sleep, and that we need to be eating more in season, and that we need to be taking ourselves out into nature and exposing ourselves to nature whenever we can, because we're not separate from nature, we're part of nature.
Yeah, it's kind of, we're discovering, I guess, our humanity as a form of creaturely existence, rather than, rather than being this brain that drives the body around as if it's a lump of meat.
Well, I often think, you know, we are mammalian, and mammalians also need touch. So, you know, going back to the vagus nerve, but again, in yoga, I often get people to do self-touch or to hug, stroke themselves, because if we're living on our own and we're isolated, we still need that sense of touch, because we are mammalian. We're not brains which are disconnected from the rest of us, being around just thinking. But that is how society has kind of pushed us in the last 50 years. So we need to reclaim ourselves.
Absolutely. And that's a bit like havening, isn't it? What you were doing there is a bit like havening. But I'm reminded from what you're saying, I read a scholar who, I forget who it was now, who said the body naturally reaches out for relations other than itself. I think it also reaches in for self-relation as well. The kind of notion of relationality as a mode of being. And I just wonder if you've got any reflections on how living with fatigue and tuning in to your own body and what's going on in your own body and becoming that kind of field of awareness somatically, how does that transform relationships with other people, the quality of relationships with other people, when you're not on your own, when you're not isolated? In other words, attunement. How does that change? Does it change for you?
I think that's a really beautiful question. So I can only answer personally, really. So because I've had fatigue in the past, I have spent, and also because I'm a yoga teacher and I'm very interested in Eastern mysticism. So I've spent quite a long time in India, a long time in meditation. And I think it's really true to say that you can't have successful relationships with other people unless you have a successful relationship with yourself. So for me, a lot of my work has become quite spiritual. I mean, this isn't something I impose on everybody because some people are not interested in that, but it's there if my students want to learn more about it. So for me, having chronic fatigue has been very much a spiritual journey of maybe pulling away more from the materialism of the world to see that there might be deeper meaning in life, and that those answers might well be within me. And then for me, yoga is all about cultivating inner peace. And the more peaceful I am, the better I relate to other people, because I'm then relating to them on a heart-to-heart basis. And this is what I think in our world is so much needed. We need to kind of drop away from the ego and the mind, drop into the heart. And then every and each person we meet, we're making this genuine, authentic connection from heart to heart. So to me, that's the true meaning of life, really, that in the moment, heart-to-heart connection.
That's beautiful. I've similarly found that my illness took me on a very deep spiritual journey, which can be challenging, let's face it.
Very.
Because I think actually the deepest healing of all is precisely that the deep inner journey, the deep inner work that transforms and awakens us to something far more profound. What one piece of like simple, achievable advice would you give to people listening today for how they could step forward into active rest?
I would say, first of all, connect with the breath. That's the starting point. So that means breathing more slowly if possible, remembering everything's a choice, learning to breathe through the nose, because often when people are fatigued or stressed, and particularly we see this with long COVID, people are breathing through the mouth. So breathing through the nose, and then learning to breathe lower down. I'll just take my chair back. So lower down from the diaphragm rather than from the upper chest. Because what we see so often in fatigue conditions is people hyperventilating, breathing up here. So just slowly learning to drop the breath down, breathe more slowly, breathe through the nose. That will really help to calm the system down. And then from that, you can start to look at things like constructive rest, slowing down. It just makes it easier to pace, because then the mind is less on this frantic loop, because the mind is very connected to the breath. And the slower we breathe, the slower the mind is. So
beautiful, very accessible, very, very empowering.
And free.
And you kind of, in a way, we're reverse engineering an energetically calm state there, aren't we? Because when we're panicked, we breathe up here, right? So if we're breathing up here, we're sending signals unconsciously to ourselves all the time that we're keeping us safe. Yeah. And that beautiful sense of slowing down through the nose gently and dropping down. It's absolutely lovely, Fiona. So thank you very much. And thank you very much for giving up some time to have this conversation. I really appreciate it so much.
It's a pleasure, and it was a lovely conversation. Thank you for your beautiful questions.
Well, thank you. And I'm sure the audience will have got a lot. Fiona, I'll link to her work, to her new book. You'll be able to find out all about what Fiona's doing. And thank you very much, Fiona.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Anna. Thank you.